Video we calculated the vertex, we found out the a, we also figured out whether we have a minimum or the maximum, and then we also were able to find the axis of symmetry. Guys, I'm continuing the same example, but in this video we want to find the x-intercept and y-intercept. And again, finding the x-intercept and y-intercept is something that probably you have been doing in the linear functions. So the idea is the key thing or the concept is still the same. To find the y-intercept, you set x equal to 0. To find the x-intercept, you set y equal to 0 and solve for the other variable, okay? So let us use those principles and those techniques to find the x and y-intercept. So let us start with finding the y-intercept first. It's easy to find the y-intercept in this case. So let's start with the y-intercept. Guys, find the y-intercept, the key idea is to set x equal to 0 and solve for y. That's how we find the y-intercept, because it is the y-intercept is the point where the graph crosses or touches the y-axis. So on the y-axis, x values are going to be 0. Similarly, on the x-axis, the y values are going to be 0. Okay. So I set x equal to 0 in this equation, and I solve for y. So if I set x equal to 0, and this is going to be my y-intercept whenever I set x equal to 0, so it's going to be 3 times, and x will be replaced by 0, 0, and 0 minus 4 whole square minus 2, and now we just simply have to simplify this. Let us go ahead and simplify. So y-intercept is 3 times 0 minus 4 is negative 4, got to square this, minus 2, and when we simplify this, we got to first simplify the parentheses and exponent here. Negative 4 squared is 16, so I get 3 times 16 minus 2. Well, we have to multiply first following the order of operations. 16 times 3 is 48. 48 minus 2 will give me 46. So that is my y-intercept. So as a coordinate point, my y-intercept is what? For x0, the corresponding y value is 46. Guys, this is my y-intercept. Okay, we have our y-intercept. Now let us go ahead and find the x-intercept. So to find the x-intercept, we need to simply set what? Set y equal to 0, and we want to solve for x. Solve for x. Guys, you have to kind of just remember this, and it's not like you're trying to remember it without understanding. You know what these things actually mean in terms of like when we visualize these things, okay? And I highly suggest that we should try to visualize things sometimes, because that helps us in understanding and also in remembering concepts, okay? So let us go ahead and see how we can find the x-intercept. So I said y equal to 0, and it's going to look like this: 3 times x minus 4 whole square minus 2. Okay. So instead of writing 0 on the left hand side, guys, I'm just going to bring that 0 to the other side. So I'm just rearranging. I'm not changing anything. I'm not changing the equation. It is still set equal to 0, but I put 0 on the right hand side. It's easy for us to actually work with equations when we have 0 on the right hand side rather than having 0 on the left hand side. It's the same thing. Now there are a few different ways of solving this equation. So I'm going to show you one of the ways which we have talked like when I started doing the quadratic equations. And what I'm going to use here is basically the square root method. So let's look at some of the steps, how we can do that. In order to use the square root method, and that's not the only method, you can also use other methods as well. Okay. So what we do is first we add 2 to both sides. And the whole idea of this adding 2 is like we want to isolate the x minus 4 square. Then only we can take the square root. We cannot just right away take the square root. We have to isolate the x term. In this case, we have an x minus 4, and then only we can take the square root. So if I do that, this crosses out. I'm left with x minus 4 whole square. There's a 3 here, and that equals to positive 2. Okay, guys, I simply added 2 to both sides. Now I still want to get rid of this 3 before I can take the square root. I don't want to take the square root right away. First I want to isolate, okay? So to get rid of that 3, since this 3 is multiplied, we know that to get rid of this 3, we have to divide both sides by 3. So I divide this by 3, divide this by 3, this crosses out. What do I have? I have x minus, so I'm going to put it right here. I have x minus 4 whole square equals to 2/3. Guys, once you get this, Okay, follow this step, then we get this step, and then you should focus on this equation right here. Because now from this equation, we can actually solve by using the square root method, which simply means take the square root on both sides. And now if we take the square root on both sides, if I take the square root on both sides, keep in mind we're solving a quadratic equation. So the square root and the square, they are opposites of each other, so they cross out. So they will cross out. I will be left with only x minus 4 on the left hand side, but on the right hand side, I will have the plus value and the minus value, okay? We are dealing with a quadratic equation, so you have to consider both plus and minus values. Now to simplify, first I will simplify square root radical 2/3, and if you have to use a calculator for that, so radical 2/3 comes close to around 0.8, I think it is 0.81, so I'm going to round it to 0.8. But I will have two values, 0.8 plus 0.8, and then I will also have the other value, which is minus negative 0.8. So I will have to write both the equations, negative 0.8. Okay guys, I simplified this using a calculator, and then I knew we had to have both plus and minus here because we are working on a quadratic equation and we're taking the radical. So both values will work. And now from these two equations, we have to simplify, we have to solve for x. So we'll add 4 to both sides here. I get x equals to 4.8. That is one of the x-intercepts, right? That is one of the x-intercepts. And then from here, I have to add 4 to both sides. And I get x equals to 4 minus 0.8 is 3.2. That is my another x-intercept. And in this case, we have how many x-intercepts? We have 2 x-intercepts, and we know what x-intercept means. It means where the graph crosses or touches the x-axis. So we have 2 x-intercepts, which also means the solutions. So if you have to find the solution, we basically found the solutions, right? So we have the x-intercept, we have the y-intercept, and we have the rest of the information that we figured out in my previous video. In the next video, we're going to use all this information to simply graph, okay? So guys, just hold on till the next video, and then I'll show you how to actually graph this function. Okay, take care.